Here is a curious idea to consider. Time is not linear and not chronological. There are people all around the planet that are being activated now. They are like sleeper agents from the future receiving their signal and are being switched on to become operational. They come from all ages and all backgrounds and are showing up in all systems. One way to think about them is as next generation leaders. There are next generation leaders emerging in education, in health and well-being, in science and policy, in art and in business and entrepreneurship. And there are next generation leaders who feel called to pioneer social, developmental, and spiritual change. Today we are talking with Tucker Walsh. Tucker came to our Portals event on co-creating humanity's future last week, and we felt that we needed to explore together, which is what we are about to do. Tucker is an Emmy Award-winning documentary director. His background in photojournalism provides him with a unique cinematic vision centered on authenticity. Tucker won an Emmy Award with the Truth Initiative and collected more than 80 awards in the top global creativity festivals. He has directed films for many of the most iconic brands and collaborated with some of the world's leading thinkers and doers, including former Vice President Al Gore and soccer superstar Lionel Messi. With all these accomplishments, Tucker felt called to listen to another tune and to embark on a discovery journey. So we want to explore with him the discovery path he is on, mid-flight, raw, before he comes to the conclusion, such that we get the benefit of mid-journey discovery. Let us dive in, Tucker. And first, where on the planet are you coming to us today?
Yes, hello. I am coming from Costa Rica, Pura Vida, as they say here. Pure life. And I'm in the beautiful jungle. It's close to Nosara, and I'm living at a community called Pachamama, which was started about 22 years ago. There's about 150 residents and another 100 to 200 guests and visitors that come throughout the year. And I spent 3 months here last year and really felt at home in many ways in this community, in this little microcosm of the future. And I came back to apprentice to what they're doing right and learning from what some of the mistakes and failures are as well. And kind of soaking that all in and learning and growing and evolving in this portal.
So what are some of the discoveries and learning this year? It's an interesting experience to be in a place and then come back a year later, and it probably looks a little different. And so what are you discovering this time?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I was just about 20 minutes ago speaking with somebody about just that, how last year when I came here, it was exactly a year ago, last November, I was coming out of what I call this cocoon phase of my journey, where I had actually spent a couple of years living in remote solitude on islands off of the coast of Maine. And I was doing a lot of deep grieving, a lot of healing, a lot of studying, a lot of kind of inner contemplation. And I came to this community last year, basically at the height of COVID, by the way, which just amplified this feeling of coming out of a cocoon and to be around other people in a place where, I really felt resurrected. I felt like it was this new me that was showing up in the world. And I was doing things that I had never done before, like dancing like a crazy person. Like I would never dance before. I spent most of my life trying not to be seen and blending into the background. And all of a sudden I wanted to just fully express myself in new ways. And so that was my experience last year. And this year, it really feels like there's a grounding energy that's coming in. There's a part that feels aware of how much of an impact every little conversation, just like you and I are having, has on not just myself and on you, but on the global, on everything, on the entire future of the cosmos, and how every little interaction, every little seed that's planted, every little moment can be just a shift in our orientation. And when it's a shift in our individual orientation, it's a shift in our collective orientation. When it's a shift in our collective orientation, it's a shift in the universal orientation. And so coming in with that hyper awareness of how I'm showing up in the world has been a big part of my journey this year. Although I just got here 12 days ago, so it's all fresh.
You are describing the sense of heightened, what you call hyper awareness, when you are so present in the moment of the conversation to the exclusion of all else. And you're finding that you're having many of these in this environment because there isn't the busyness of needing to rush to the next thing. You are describing that every conversation is a portal into the universe at large. And when you say that, what I'm experiencing from you is the sense of being so alive, so vividly present. I'm asking about that practice and that experience.
Yeah. What's coming up for me right now is just this perception of how everything is just a mirror for everything else. And so what's happening internally in my physical body is just a mirror of what's happening between you and I. You know, you could be a different organ and I could be a different organ. And in a community container like Pachamama, it's basically taking what's happening on a universal scale, which is literally not fathomable to the human mind. And it's just kind of condensing it down into something that can be perceived, something where we can have an actual embodied awareness of what's happening. And then we can take that kind of communal dance that's constantly at play through the beauty of consciousness, and we can take it down to the micro level and take it all the way up to the macro level. And we can begin to see how these little interactions that we have are scaling in all these different dimensions. And to be aware of that in the present moment is really fascinating, because on the one hand, that sounds very conceptual. It sounds like a lot of thoughts that might be distracting from the present moment. But I find in practice for me lately, it's actually been a reminder of the miracle of what's at play, and a reminder of the almost impossibility of what is happening. And it kind of is it's a feeling of my heart opening. It's a feeling of recognizing how precious this moment is, how precious it is because it's constantly fleeting. You know, the moment actually doesn't exist because there's never really actually a moment, because the moment's constantly changing. And so the moment itself is an illusion. So there was one time here where I was walking down this path that I'm actually standing right next to, and I looked at a tree and I just started weeping my eyes out, because I just realized that this whole concept of time is completely sort of a figment of our mental constructs, and how beautiful that is, that we have that figment, that we have that possibility of time that we can play in and we can construct things in and build things in. But then to hold paradoxically and simultaneously that it's also an illusion to some extent, and it's also fleeting, and that this precious moment is constantly being born and there's death and rebirth basically constantly. And so there's a constant grieving process that's happening with me, and a constant joy and ecstasy that's happening at the same time. And I think holding both of those simultaneously and trying to navigate my way through those strong emotions and through those strong cosmic forces, so to speak, is one of the ways that I'm attempting to stay present. How I'm actually doing that, I don't know if I could give you an answer.
Fair enough. So what we want to do is actually trace a bit of the journey that brings you to this point, and also what is the inquiry that you are coming into this experience with, and some of the insights and portentive visions that are beginning to arise with you from within this crucible experience. And that's what we are about to unfold in the next little while. So if you needed to describe the sentiment or the inquiry that's active with you right now at this stage in the journey, before we even trace backward, how would you describe what is the the sentiment or the inquiry that you are living into today or every day? You may have already sensed into it, but I'm curious if you needed to frame it as an inquiry, how would you frame it?
Yeah. Whenever I notice some tension within me, whether it's being triggered or whether it's feeling that something should be different than how it is, I have this remembrance that on the most macro level, on the most universal level, and also the most fundamental basic level, that everything is perfect. Everything is playing out exactly how it's meant to be. And having that kind of embodied knowledge, it's not even a conscious thought, it's really just a somatic feeling, allows me to trace back where the tension is in where I'm feeling that tension and where that story that everything is perfect is, and it kind of allows me to close the gap. And I spent so much of my life operating from this belief, looking at the world through this filter of there's something wrong with me, there's something wrong with the world, there's something wrong with society, there's something wrong with X, Y, and Z. And that created this feeling of constriction, of contraction. It made me want to feel small and invisible. And it prevented me from fully expressing myself in the world and from fully showing up in the world, honestly. It was a story that allowed me to escape into my shadow. And this new sensibility that actually everything is beautiful and perfect and precious and playing out exactly as it should be playing out allows me to have a sense of faith and trust that basically allows me to take risks and fears that I wouldn't have otherwise. It allows me to jump over that threshold with my full 110% of Tucker on board, knowing that, you know, whatever belief system or story that we have is beautiful. So I'll just use the word my soul is guiding me. And then on a even larger level, the universe or God or source or spirit is also kind of orchestrating this beautiful dance at the same time. And the more that I'm able to just surrender to that belief that, like, wow, everything is happening exactly how it's meant to be, the more that's actually becoming a lived reality, and the more I'm able to surrender. And it's just like this constant infinity sign where it's just constantly reminding itself of its own truth, essentially. And then it becomes a feeling of coming home. It's a feeling of being at home, both in myself as a human and as coming home to the entire universe.
How would you describe or reconcile this discovery or insight that, as you say, everything is perfect and is happening exactly as it's meant to be happening, and the sense that there is a lot of ugliness and cruelty in the world generated at the hands of human beings who make those suboptimal choices? How do you reconcile those two awarenesses inside?
Yeah, that's a constant practice. And there's actually, I would actually say that I'm not really trying to reconcile them. I'm trying to hold that they're both simultaneously true, and they're just different truths operating at different dimensions of reality, you could say. And when I come home to this feeling of on a deeper level, on a more spiritual level, that everything is perfect, it allows me to show up in the world in a way that is coming from a place of love, because it's coming from a place of gratitude and acceptance. It's coming from a place of celebrating what is, which allows me to fully feel that there's this human being that consciousness is operating from, that really wants to make the world a better place for other human beings and for other animals and, you know, the larger ecosystem, for all living beings. And so it's a total paradox. It's a total paradox. And I could get into, you know, metaphysical answers about why we need, you know, the darkness to have light, and we need duality to have oneness, and we have, you know, all this stuff. But I don't want to go down that conceptual rabbit hole. I'm sure people can read non-duality books and figure that out for themselves. But yeah, in my lived experience, it's really just about being able to kind of operate in different perspectives that are operating, you could say, at different dimensions of reality. Of course, it's all arising in this present moment and awareness, but holding different truths simultaneously and allowing both of those to move me in different ways at different times, depending on how the universe wants a particular moment to play out.
The language I will sometimes use in my own contemplation to replace the idea that everything is perfect is to consider that there is perfection and it's always available, and I may be grounded or anchored in that, or I may be choosing to be anchored in something else where there is an issue or a problem that I'm called to address, and the two are not mutually exclusive. They just offer a different grounding place. So that's partly how I process that, without necessarily transmitting that everything is perfect, because there are a lot of things right now in this world that are not just imperfect, are painfully suboptimal and worse. And yet there is perfection at the same time in this other sphere that you're able to get in touch with and experience, where the discovery, the unlocking power is that darkness cannot unlock darkness. Light can release darkness. So you're saying I have to be grounded in a place, in a source, in an emanating blessing realms from which there is a fountain of well-being and permission that ultimately is transformative into everything else. And in that place, everything is perfect. That's at least the way I hear what you're saying. And being grounded in that space affords you the freedom, the liberation to be an agent, an agency of that process into the world, rather than the other side of the equation, the other side of the street.
Yeah, that's well said. And I would just add that perfection, definitions are so important here. Perfection doesn't mean that it's lacking bad. And when I use the word perfection with a capital P, I'm saying that it includes the bad and the horrible and the evil, because that creates good. And it, I just want to maybe take this down more to my personal lived experience, because I feel like that's where more of the fruit will be. And I'm reminded in this moment that about 3.5 years ago, I was feeling suicidal. I was at a fancy resort in Big Sur, spending $1,000 a night. I got a call from in my hotel room saying that I won 6 Cannes Lion Awards, which are the kind of most sought after awards in the advertising industry. And I felt giddy for about 10 minutes. And then that buzz that I'd been working for years to experience and feel wore off in 10 minutes. And it was followed by this deep emptiness and this desire to literally jump off the cliff of Big Sur, of this fancy resort, with my beloved wife next to me. And I just wanted to disappear. I wanted to become nothing. And so, I don't sit here now saying like, oh, everything is perfect, with this kind of spiritual bypassing part of me that's kind of blocking off the suffering in the world. But it's coming from a place of recognizing that the suffering that I experienced in that moment was actually the greatest gift of my entire life, because it provided this jet fuel that literally allowed me to catalyze in growth and evolution in 3 years that have gotten me to this moment right now where I'm telling you that everything is perfect. And I never, ever, ever could have gotten to this place if I didn't feel that so low and so down. And, I'm recognizing that people might say, well, you were at a fancy resort and, poor you, and yes, that's true. And on another level, when you do every single thing, or you accomplish every single thing that society, our modern traditional society, is telling us to do, when I checked all the boxes and I won the game that was supposed to lead to happiness and joy, and when I feel the exact opposite of that, that's almost in a way scarier, because where do you go from there? where do you go from when you're at the end of the road? Imagine it's like the Truman Show. Where do you go when you're on a sailboat and you think you're in a vast, endless ocean, and all of a sudden you get to a wall and you realize that the whole thing is fake and you're trapped? That's a pretty fucking terrible feeling.
Yeah.
And I found myself there.
Well, so this initiatory experience that you are describing, you wrote about, which essentially is what made me reach out to have this conversation, because you published on Medium an extraordinary essay that you called A Map for My Younger Self. And I imagine what you are describing now is partly the catalyst for this writing, which is profound, because you're writing and you're using a kind of a voice dialogue technique in the writing itself. You're doing your own gestalt therapy on yourself in a dialogue with your 3-year-older, communicating to your younger self, and so on. And the beauty of this dialogue and the comfort that one voice can offer the other is pretty riveting. But just before we go there, how would you describe the run-up to this extraordinary event, when you just won everything that anybody in the marketing space could dream for? What was the journey from wherever you'd like to pick it up, in college or that leads you to that, and then we'll pick up the story there?
Yeah, sure. When I was 13 years old, I got a camera for my birthday, and I went on a community service trip to Kenya. And I basically used photography as a tool to overcome homesickness. I was away from my family for the first time, with a bunch of much older teenagers, and I kind of used photography as a form of art therapy to keep myself sane. And I came home from that trip and developed all these photographs at CVS Pharmacy, and my mom looked at them and said, "These are pretty amazing. You should show them to our next door neighbor. He's a National Geographic photographer." And what was crazy is, actually in Kenya, there was a woman that looked at me halfway through the trip, and she said, "You know, Tucker, I have a feeling one day you're going to work for National Geographic." And a month later, I was essentially editing my next door neighbor's wildlife photography that appeared in National Geographic. And that started a budding photography career, photojournalism career. I started photographing weddings and going to Adobe Photoshop seminars at the age of 15, 16 with all 50-year-old dudes, and it was pretty funny. And but I was very lucky. I just found this passion. I fell completely head over heels in love with photography, and I ended up studying photojournalism. I went to a small art school, the Corcoran School of Art and Design, which is 1 block from the White House. And my freshman year of college, Barack Obama was elected president. And it just felt like the center of the universe. It felt like I was just in the mecca of the world to photograph history as it was literally unfolding in front of my eyes. Yeah, and I really had this deep desire ever since I was 13. One of my first memories was showing those photographs from Kenya of all the different people in the landscape to my grandparents, who are Trump supporters, and they watch Fox News and they say lots of racist comments. And my grandparents were just amazed, like, wow, these people are so beautiful, and look at what they're wearing, that's incredible, and asking all these questions. And I saw how these photographs basically knocked down all the cultural walls and stereotypes and barriers, and it just allowed humans to connect with other humans. And so that was the intention with which I went into my career with. And the week I graduated college, I got hired by a very, very small production company called Missing Pieces. And I worked out of basically an apartment in Brooklyn, and doing some small time kind of commercial and nonprofit projects. And Missing Pieces just completely took off over the next couple of years. And I rode the wave with them. And I was very, very lucky in a lot of ways. And also I really helped propel the success of the company. And within a couple of years, I was living this dream life that I never even knew I dreamed about, to be honest. flying first class, all over the world, staying at the nicest hotels in all these international cities, interviewing celebrities, and getting paid just an astronomical amount of money for a 23, 24-year-old kid, and making films and commercials that were being seen by millions of people on YouTube and television. And that part of me that wanted to tell human stories and just work for the New York Times or be a National Geographic photographer kind of faded away. It just sort of went a little bit more into the subconscious, and this drive that I had to be successful and make a lot of money and to kind of do the things that I was told that were important for me to do became what was first and foremost. Yeah, that was my mission, essentially. And so I had this split personality where deep down I was trying to kind of change the world through human storytelling, but on the surface I was living this lavish, career-driven, advertising director lifestyle. And it was very challenging, to be honest. It was very challenging to have the split intentions and to have a lot of times my ethics run up against reality. So essentially what happened is when I was 27 years old, I had this year of just complete mania, traveling all over the world, just defying time zones. I was completely burnt out, completely jet lagged, really feeling disconnected from my soul. And I did this project. One of my last projects was on the opioid crisis. And I met a woman named Rebecca, who was just a complete angel that came into my life at the exact right moment. And as she was detoxing off of heroin, I was interviewing her, and she looked at me and she said, "Tucker, you don't look so good." And I said, "Excuse me? I'm the hotshot director here, and you're literally detoxing off heroin, and you're telling me I don't look so good. What are you talking about?" But it was just this moment where she shook my soul awake, essentially, and she revealed to me that she saw in me what I would refuse to see in myself, which is that I was a walking zombie by that point. I was a hollow shell. And we ended up saving each other's lives, to be honest.
This is the film you won the Emmy for?
Yeah, this is the film we won the Emmy for, which was amazing to have her at the Emmy Awards when she was over a year sober at that point. And she's doing remarkably well now, and as am I. And she inspired me to really start my healing journey. So I ended up going to a holistic psychiatrist, expecting to be prescribed antidepressants. And instead he said, "Tucker, I'm not going to prescribe you drugs, but I will prescribe you a book. And it's called Nature and the Human Soul by Bill Plotkin." And I was like, "All right, cool. I'll get to it." He goes, "No, Tucker, read it today." And I was like, "Okay, wow, geez." And I picked up the book that day and started reading it, and I just absolutely devoured it. And it completely changed my life. I basically realized that I needed a new story. Like, what do you do when I could only speak for myself? And but I suspect this is true of many people who feel like they're at the end of their ropes and are maybe even contemplating death or suicide. And I suspect a lot of it, the reason is that there's not really a reason to live. There's not a new story to live into. There's nothing to strive for. And that's where I was at. I was like, I had done everything, I had achieved everything, and I feel the opposite of what I thought I would feel. And I didn't really know what else there was to do besides more of the same. And this book is a developmental book. It talks about the different stages of human evolution. And I realized that it was actually much simpler. I reached the end of the stage of development that society is basically at, and that I was at, and I had hit a wall, and it was time to evolve into a new stage. And this book created a blueprint for me to find my way through the darkness.
You begin your Medium essay by saying, your opening paragraph is, this is you addressing your younger self, and you say, "It may feel like life is falling apart right now, like you are sinking into a deep, dark, never-ending hole of depression, disillusionment, and despair. But in a few years, you will soon come to find out that you're actually, as Richard Rohr so paradoxically puts it, falling upwards. Falling upwards." So say a little more about that falling upwards experience.
Yeah. This is my own interpretation, not Richard Rohr's, but what the image that is arising for me is of feeling like I had dug my way into sort of a ditch and into a black hole. And I was just darkness. And I needed a lifeline. Like I literally needed a hand from God. And all of a sudden I felt like lifted up by this energy or this spirit or this force or this soul or whatever terminology. And I just felt almost a sense of resurrection. But when I was resurrected back out of that black hole, I wasn't somebody. I was actually nobody. And I needed to reconstruct who the hell I am and what is my purpose and why am I alive. And there's no book that can tell you how to do that. There's books that can point you in the right direction for how to create situations that allow you to dissolve and die and to find that liminal space of nothingness. But that process of being reborn and dying before you die and being reborn in this lifetime, in this incarnation is the most intimate process I could possibly imagine. I haven't given birth to a child. I'm not a father, but I suspect it's on par with that experience. And that's a whole nother story, but I would say the falling upwards feeling was a feeling of realizing that I'm not actually guiding this process, that I needed to actually, like my ego ran myself into my ground and I needed to surrender to some other force. And that was a slow process of melting the iceberg of control that gave way to surrender.
You then write again to your younger self, educating, instructing, informing your younger self by saying, what you should know is that humans evolve in stages. You go from egocentric, primarily caring about ourselves and our immediate family, which is the phase you were just describing, where you talk about your ego leading you to that point, to that ditch, to ethnocentric, primarily caring about our tribe and community, to world-centric, caring for all humans, to cosmocentric, caring for all life in all universes. So you are being awakened through this threshold, through this portal, to the idea of developmental maps and developmental journeys. So take me a little bit through those early stages where you're right at the bottom, and what happens then? How do you process that bottom, and where is the first place where you feel all of a sudden that you have a steady foot or something else? How would you tell that story?
Yeah, I've never phrased it in this way before, but the image that's arising is a trampoline. And the farther you fall, the more you're catapulted up, and it's like this. And so I don't think it was actually this, the metaphor, a lot of people, there's a spiritual cliche of climbing the mountain, but I find it's much more of a expansion, contraction, and it's much more like a pendulum. And so it was about these little miracles, these little synchronicities that would happen that would remind me, like, hey, keep going. I felt like it was the universe patting my back and saying, keep going, young man, keep going, trust, surrender, have faith. And those would happen. I did 10-day silent meditation.
By the way, the background we hear, these are birds, these are wild birds all around you, correct?
Yeah, is that okay? Is it
yeah, no, it's perfect. Just so people watching us would know you're in the middle of the jungle with a bunch of wild birds all around you. So great, please.
Okay. Yeah. So but then all of those beautiful moments that came often at meditation retreats or vision quest ceremonies or through psychedelic experiences or through therapy sessions even, a lot of that was always met with this resistance of the old patterning, the old ways, the old beliefs. So it's kind of a 2-step forward, 1-step back type of process. And it's slowly, you know, patience for someone that's a director, you know, in advertising. It's like, hey, we have this project, we have $1 million, we need it done in a month. You better do it, whatever it takes. That's not really how the healing journey happens. It's much more about surrendering to God's will, to inshallah. I love that Sufi term, inshallah, God willing. Yeah.
What was the most painful part, and what was the most beautiful part?
It was exactly the same thing. It was separating from my high school sweetheart of 10 years, and we separated in the most beautiful way. You know, my parents got into a very nasty divorce when I was 13. I always made a promise with myself that I would never do the same. And when Sam and I separated, it was, I felt like I was separating from love itself. I felt like I was disconnecting from my source of love, and I needed to find a way to feel love myself, to learn how to love myself. And the pain of recognizing that I don't actually love myself and that I don't actually know how to love myself created so much compassion that in that moment, I finally learned the first baby step as to how to love myself. And so it took the most painful thing to create the most beautiful thing. And maybe that goes back to this concept of everything is perfect in a way on some level. And so this grief that I felt for Sam, I just grieved intensely for, you know, over 2 years. And still sometimes I have grief where I arise, because it wasn't only Sam the human being. It was really this entire life that I was grieving, and my relationship with her was sort of a metaphor for this whole dream that had been kind of programmed into me since I was a little kid, that I was striving for. And
you were grieving hair, you were grieving yourself in hair, you were grieving hair in you, and you were grieving the full package of having arrived to everything that modern life proposed to you was perfect, to discover that it was empty vessel for you.
Yeah. It was grieving the sweetness of loving somebody so deeply, in part because I had a God-sized hole. I grew up with atheist parents, and I didn't really have any connection to spirituality or to something larger than just myself as a individual human body, mind. And when I disconnected from that human relationship, I had to find another source for that love and that connection to spirit, that connection to self with a capital S. And that process of discovering that there was another way to receive love that was so much larger than myself, or so much larger than something I could just control or craft or confine or fix or purchase, you know, on Amazon. That process was so incredibly painful, but it felt like the most true thing I had ever pursued in my life. It felt like something worth dying for. And ironically, when I had something worth dying for, I had something worth living for. Total paradox. And so I went on a mission to learn how to love myself. And that took many different shapes and expressions. And I didn't always use that phrase, how to love myself. But at the core, that's always what it was. And it still remains that to this day. And the thing is that my understanding of what myself is has expanded to beyond just me and my soul and this individual human body, mind. And it's really begun to grow, and I hope it continues to grow until it's
how to love life,
until it source itself. Yeah,
how to love life in its fullest, broadest manifestation.
Yeah, exactly.
So still just staying with this part of the journey, if you now would apply this same frame, that you make an advisory from the experienced you to the struggling you through this, what do you say to that a little younger person, a couple of years younger than where you are today? What do you say to that person today?
Yeah, I want to say that I want to say what I never said to myself in those younger years, which is that you were so unbelievably incredible and courageous, and you're doing it. Like, it's not even a question of, oh, make sure you turn left, you know, when you get to this intersection. It's like, you were so on the path. There is no way to be off of the path. You're swimming in the ocean that you're trying to swim towards. Like, you're already there, you're already doing it. It's all already happening. And the fact that you're afraid that maybe it's not happening, or that maybe you're not already there, that maybe you're off the path, is exactly why I know that you're on the path. And so just allow that fear to be there, allow that anxiety to be there, allow the suffering to be there, because all of that is ultimately there to keep you safe. And yeah, there's nowhere else to go except exactly where you are. And I promise you, it's absolutely perfect. It's more than perfect. You're gonna look back in a couple of years from now and just laugh your ass off with a massive smile, and we'll celebrate together.
And one of the reasons we are daring to ask you to make this mid-journey testimony right here, right now, is because of the sense and the knowing that there are many people who may be experiencing similar thoughts and similar feelings and similar struggles, and may need to hear just this very simple message. Because what you are describing and what you're demonstrating, which is why I call this our next generation leaders, is when we are awakened into a journey like this, the first place we lead, the first thing we lead, the first person we lead is ourselves. And we lead ourselves by, first of all, becoming present to what is occurring in our life. One of the reasons why I found your Medium essay so intriguing and compelling, and apart from the fact that you are an awesome writer and a very lucid articulator of the experience, is that you then come to describe the Babushka project, and I've literally had a similar experience in my mid-20s. Just I didn't have the information that was available for you. I graduated as a fighter pilot in the Israeli Air Force, another top of the world kind of an achievement for a young man. Supposedly everything that you could aspire for as a young man in terms of how society views that. And I was living a high intensity life, and probably, although the word was not at all part of my vocabulary, probably I was experiencing a tinge, a mild depression. I just didn't know it at the time, because it was A, not part of my framework and experience and education, and B, I lived a high intensity life. But there was a weight that I experienced in my chest at the time that it would take years to understand that probably what I was experiencing was some form of spiritual yearning, an extraordinary spiritual yearning, and an existential anxiety. The existential anxiety was that just 3-4 years earlier in my high school, the last year of high school, I came to an agreement with the principal of the school, which was that I was being allowed to tutor myself, be alone in library. And for about, actually more than a year, for about a year and a half, I surrounded myself with all the books that I could find. This was pre-internet time, and you couldn't easily search and find. And there was a point where I felt that I was making contact with something. I didn't know what it was that I was making contact with. I didn't have the the language. And then I wrote my summation at the time, which was my assertion about the human case. And more than, though this philosophical essay intuited the development project and intuited the invisible, diaphanous realms, I didn't really have the language. Nobody in my environment spoke about those things. So more than anything, it was an exercise of oath making and taking an oath or taking a vow that I will remember how powerful and vividly profound the experience of a young man inquiring about meaning and purpose was, and that I will not allow myself to forget to remember that, because mostly when I looked at the adults around me, they looked like, forgive me, at the time, this is me, 16, 17, they looked like dead walking. They were no longer alive on the inside. And I took a vow that I will not follow that path. And I was 4 or 5 years later, just graduated as a 3-4 years later, graduated as a fighter pilot. Everything was available for me in that sense. But I felt not as dramatic as you have described it, but a sense of something big is missing here. And out of that crucible, a tormenting crucible, I stumbled upon an initiatory experience that led me into now 4 decades of journey in what you'd best describe as a modern mystery school, sourcing and getting in touch with yourself and with the universal logic of why we're here, and dealing with these mysteries every day. And that's when I, for myself, realized that we were, each one of us, if we were present to it, a babushka project that was, in my mind, I was going to continue to live a high-intensity life in the world. And on the inside, there was another life, the smaller babushka inside, was going to be a life of pursuit, the pursuit of meaning, the pursuit of purpose, the pursuit of practice, where that life knew that it was no longer looking at life through the lens of I am a human being seeking a spiritual experience. Rather, I realized I was a spirit being seeking the testimony of the human experience, such that I can then embrace that experience and bring that intelligence through the instance that this life is, as a proffering back to whatever it was that I came from, and that this was a way to view life, that life was here in this beautiful place. It's easier to see with the surrounding trees around you that this world was a nursery of life, where we get here to do the practice run to continue to evolve who we are becoming and discover who we are becoming. And that we take that experience, and if this is not just an eternal repetition, we then are able to progress somehow this experience from ourselves to others. So all that was kind of resonating and echoing when I read the part in your essay that you were describing, that you were recognizing the babushka project of your life, which brought us to this conversation. So first of all, thank you very much, because you evoked all that. But I'm curious, where are you right now with your babushka project? How are you journeying with this further discovery? And we said at the outset, we are deliberately having this conversation before you, quote unquote, have arrived to any final destination. You are in the rawness of the moment, of still discovering, but with tremendous amount of now know-how that you downloaded, and frameworks and mental models that enable you to navigate the dissolving of self and the rediscovery of self in a whole new way.
Beautiful. I really appreciated hearing more about your story, and I resonate fully. Yeah, I feel like this conversation is part of the Babushka project. I mean, this is it, right? This is part of it. And Yeah, it's funny. I'm not sure how this exactly ties in, but when you were speaking, I had this expression pop up that's when you take one step towards God, God takes 10 steps towards you. And what I was picturing is that when you and God, or me and God, actually meet, we hug, and then God disappears and God just becomes infused as me. And there's this feeling of like, wow, I am the thing that I was searching for all along. And love is the love that it's constantly searching for. And so if it's all this beautiful playground of Mother Earth and consciousness that we can create from, and it's all here to be loved and explored and used as a tool in the sandbox of the mystery. What do I want to create, and how do I want to show up, and how do I want to express myself as a creature of God, as a creature of spirit? And that to me is a living question. It's a koan. It's something that I suspect I'll take with me to my deathbed and beyond. And so, yeah, I don't think that there is an answer. And I hope that you don't interview me in a few years from now and I say that I've arrived or that I found the answer, because I don't know, that doesn't feel right to me at this moment.
You said that you were born and raised in an atheist family. So, and you now talk about literally describing the experience of being infused with God. First of all, is it difficult, or is it easy for you to say the word God and mean it in this way? Because what often happens, if you did not have early experience that developed filaments, the mental filaments, the process filaments, the process infrastructure, the internal wiring diagram to process these ideas, sometimes it is difficult to unlock or unleash. It is similar, what I'm describing, to the conundrum that if a child earlier in life, they never experienced unconditional love, it will be difficult for them later because they haven't developed the program or the wiring diagram, the operating system of that unconditional love. And you did not have that experience earlier, but you are able to now say this not just as words, but as words that you are able to speak from the inside out. So I'm actually pausing with even what you offer there to ask you, where are you in this journey of integration and giving birth to these sentiments and feelings and inquiries?
That feels like an epically large question, but I'm gonna do my best to dance with it. As a photographer, when I was younger, I just had the feeling that I've always been a seeker. I've always literally been looking through the lens of, I've been looking through a portal, seeking love or God or spirit, whatever word. And I found it through human storytelling. I found it through connection with others. I found it through my romantic relationship. I found it through grief and pain and suffering. And after enough of those experiences of finding it in so many different places, I realized that it's actually everywhere. It's actually in the seeking for that which feels that it's not, is actually that which it is. And so when that understanding becomes sort of a new reality through which one can perceive the world, it both is the most kind of normal and mundane experience, but it also seems to unlock infinitely more potential and possibilities. And it's almost like my body just straightened up, and I straightened my spine, and it almost feels like this ground beneath my feet, and a lot of the spiritual traditions, they say it's the groundless ground. And in a way, this feeling, this sense of like truth, and the sense that it's actually right here, right now. It's not somewhere else. It's not there's nowhere else to go to get this thing. It's right here, right now. It creates a new ground, and maybe it's invisible, but it creates this feeling of stability and solidity. and I don't feel the need to go and look for it anymore. And I think that's why I really have absolutely no desire to pick up a camera again. It's just not, it's interesting. I was so in love with that art form, and now I feel like I can see it with my own eyes. I don't need to use a camera to capture it anymore. And it was almost like I needed the camera to show myself in the photographs to convince myself of the thing that I think I intuitively sensed, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. What you're describing is, here is how I'm experiencing what you just said. Witnessing is one of the meanings of life. We ask in many ways, why are we here? What is the purpose of life? What is the meaning of life? And we can answer it through all sorts of wisdom traditions and spiritual traditions and vision quests and so on. One of the answers is we're here to touch life, touch other people, touch this moment. And right next with it, we are here to witness this moment, to witness other people, to witness ourselves. And there is something in the witnessing and in the witnessing of witnessing that affords us that property that's beyond the disappearance of the expendability of this moment in time. And I now interpret, and I'll give you back my story about the story you just offered me, which was, could it be that your fascination with the camera and with the idea of photography was because it gave you permission to seek the quote-unquote spiritual, that sense of aliveness that in your environment, in your surrounding, nobody cared about too much or demonstrated that that was the thing to do, but the photography gave you permission. You were undercover doing that as a photographer, but you now have access to it right here, right now, in the moment by moment living of a life. I would guess and venture to guess that there could be a moment where the camera reasserts itself in service of another purpose, another cause, but time will tell.
Yeah, for sure. And I have many ideas about that. And but it would be picking up the camera as a tool to help illuminate that which I'm already sensing or seeing and or witnessing, and it would be something to play with. It wouldn't be a job. It wouldn't be something to. It would be something to create as the creator seeks it to be created. But I would say now we talked about you mentioned this lightness shining into the dark, and the Babushka project for me feels like being a lighthouse, basically, that is this vessel that allows kind of the light of love, the light of God, to come through me in any way, shape, or form. And that could even come through me in my darkness. That could even come through me and through my shadow, that helps somebody else see their own shadow and helps them on their healing journey. So this is not me walking around pretending to be some enlightened being that's giving off this golden aura. It's really me fully showing up as a human being, just embodied in all my perfect imperfection. And what I'm doing at Pachamama is just living my most human life, and sharing my story and really showing up fully. And it seems like every single day there's many conversations and interactions with people here where it just feels like, wow, we just exchanged a little bit of magic with each other. We just kind of planted some seeds, and we just traded medicine, essentially. And each of us is like this piece of the puzzle, and we're all scrambled up right now in this box, and the pieces of the puzzle are being laid out. And in each of these little interactions, it feels like a little piece is clicking, a little piece is clicking, a little piece is clicking, and some larger image is unfolding. And the thing is that larger image is infinite, and it's ever expanding, and it's ever growing. But we get to create it together, and we also get to sort of surrender to the fact that it's being created through us. So it's both and. It's a total paradox. And in some moments, it feels like I'm making a concerted, conscious effort to be that creator, to be that change maker, to be that leader that's showing up in the world. And at other moments, it feels like it's just happening through me and I have no idea what is going on. But somehow, some way, it's all just playing out so beautifully that I can only look back when my jaw drops in amazement. In other days, it's really frustrating. And there's the old stories of, oh, there's something I need to do, or there's something I need to prove, there's some way I need to show up to kind of check the boxes of what a human should be doing in these times of existential crisis. And those stories, I think, are beautiful as well, because they point to a deeper truth, which is that there's a part of me that is so deeply desiring to be of service, to be a human that continues to tell stories that help us illuminate what is true and what is real and what is love.
Let me try and rethread through some of the elements that you offered. First, to this idea of fully showing up. If you were to try to codify it as a practice, the practice of showing up fully in the way you are practicing it now every day, how would you describe it as a brief? Somebody said, teach me how to show up fully every day. What would you tell them?
That's such a great question. Wow. There's this process of alchemizing the core wound to the sacred gift. And that core wound is different for everybody. And that sacred gift is different for everybody. And thank God it is, because we need the diversity of all those gifts in order to create the harmony of this immense diversity. And so everyone's path and journey will be a little bit different. But for me, the universal principles of showing up fully are showing up in our imperfection, knowing that is absolutely perfect, because that is what is. And what is what is. That's all that there is. And so let's just first surrender to that, accept that, and fully show up as that. And so if that is me stumbling over an answer in this interview, and then a part of me being like, wow, Tucker, you really messed that one up, if he's going to think this is going terribly, then that's beautiful, because that's showing somebody else that might have been feeling that way earlier that, I'm feeling that way, and it gives them permission to feel that way. And that prevents stuff from going into the shadow and from going into the subconscious and from going into that shame complex. And that's when stuff gets distorted and twisted, and it comes out in ways that that create more suffering, and basically creates a longer duration of time before we're able to see and witness those parts of us and bring light to those parts, if ever. So it means also, for me personally, it means celebrating. It means really feeling joy and feeling aliveness, because so much of my life I was so serious. Imagine being a 13, 14-year-old kid and working for a National Geographic photographer. Most kids were out just hanging out on the summer day and playing wiffle ball or whatever, and I was like deadly serious about my pursuit and my passion from such a young age. And that ended in an almost near fatal train wreck at 27, 28 years old. And so really a part of my journey is like letting loose and having fun and dancing and hugging somebody, and just like these little human things that feel so much more than just human, because they feel like miracles. They feel like something that is like, for example, when we talk about climate change and showing up for ways that we can solve the existential crises, one of the things that doesn't really get mentioned, it's kind of an unspoken, is why do we want to save humanity? Why do we want to be alive? Like, why is this life worth celebrating and saving? And I think if we ask that question and return to that question more, and basically invite ourselves to actually fully show up in the preciousness that we want to preserve, if we spend more time in that preciousness, in that long hug, and that watching that beautiful film on Netflix, cuddling with our romantic partner, eating that most delicious, meal at the restaurant, if we spend more time just like fully being present with those moments, I think all of these existential crises that we're facing are going to find a way to resolve in some way, shape, or form. And I'm recognizing how potentially naive that sounds, but it's a deeper trust in the power of just being fully present and knowing, at the very least, let's start there. And then we can have conversations about an infinite array of other possible solutions.
How would you, and you don't need to, but how would you address or answer a cynical voice who says, well, easy for you to say you made a lot of money when you were 27 and you afforded yourself the freedom to live somewhat a careless life, not in the sense of not caring about anything, but not worrying, and you have created for yourself that freedom. I live a life of commitment and responsibility. I have kids and family and jobs to haul, and I never get the privilege or the luxury to sense into harm feeling deep inside. What would you say to that voice? If you were to say anything, you may say, no, it's not something that I need to address, it's something that they need to address. But if you did address it, what would you say?
Yeah, I would say they're absolutely right. That is a fantastic point. And it's a point that I used to shame myself about constantly. There were times where I was living alone in Maine, and this beautiful home on the water. I'd wake up to the sound of waves crashing on, basically on my bedroom window. And I would say, I would feel like shit. I would feel like shit for being dealt a good deck of cards by the universe. And then I realized that's not helping anybody. Me being in a place of privilege and then not even appreciating and enjoying the privilege is actually worse than having the privilege and realizing how fucking lucky I am. And from that place of really accepting the privilege, I ended up selling all my possessions, donated a third of my savings to different nonprofits, and I ended up doing a ton of different community service projects and living off the grid in the most sustainable way possible. I stopped flying, to help with reduce my carbon footprint. And I really just felt like this outpouring of wanting to do everything I could in my power to help other people experience just a little bit of the joy and the love and also the pain and the grief that I've experienced in this lifetime. And I would just say that a different way of answering that is the 13-year-old boy in me is reminding me that when I went to Kenya and I filmed people that had literally not a dollar, like they didn't even have a currency. They were just the most, my racist Trump supporting grandparents could see how happy those people were and were amazed by them. And so, it's quite palpable how different people that are living in different societies are may not have much materially, but they're showing up in a way that I think we Westerners could have a lot to learn from. And but it's a very complex challenge, and it's one that I literally think about every single day. And I'm living into that question fully.
What are your deepest intuitions, Tucker, about where this process is leading you? It's as I'm with you in the moment, it literally sounds like you are in the process of midwifing something. You're midwifing the next iteration of who you are becoming. You are in the process of relinquishing the need to know, surrendering yourself to a process of discovery, of life, of yourself inside it all. Right now in Costa Rica, perhaps in a few weeks or months in a different tangent or leg of the journey. But what are the deepest intuitions you have about where this process is leading you?
Yeah, I'm in an apprenticeship phase of my journey. So I just want to make it clear, I'm not just hanging out in Costa Rica, sipping pina coladas. I'm really essentially putting myself through the grad school of life, and apprenticing to different alternative communities that are living different ways. I'm doing many different developmental psychology programs online, and just finished a coaching certificate program. So there's a lot that's happening, a lot of different threads that are beginning to weave together. And one of the ways that I'm really excited for how that could potentially take place actually relates to your previous question about how we can bring some of the magic that these containers, these workshops, these alternative communities that are often very expensive and far away from America, how can we bring the essence of those back to our local communities in the States? And one idea I have for that is by reclaiming some of the sacred spaces that already exist in our communities. And some of those could actually be churches or synagogues. The attendance rate at these traditional religious institutions is plummeting, especially the younger generation. And how can we actually take some of these physical structures that are already in pretty much every town in America and create lighthouses, create places where everyone is welcome to come and to heal and to transform and to commune with community, to commune with spirit, to commune with their soul, to commune with their purpose. And how can we have different modalities that a lot of folks experience, from breathwork and meditation to 12-step programs to plant medicine ceremonies to reintroducing ritual and indigenous wisdom to the study of developmental psychology and different states of consciousness. And how can we bring a lot of the different maps and models and tools and modalities that I've been swimming in and many others, and bring those to these little lighthouses that are all across the globe in a way that both meets the needs of the individuals in that community while also being a decentralized network of healing modalities, of healing centers that are creating the world that we want to see by actually creating a little microcosm of it in these communities. And that to me feels really important for many reasons.
You're describing these. You're describing these as lighthouses, correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you are. What you're describing is nothing less than a complete, total, spiritual, societal, and spiritual renewal in America or in the Western world. If something similar like this was going to happen in Europe, which some will say is a utopian dream, but then the utopian dreams of today are tomorrow's actuality. We've seen this throughout history, time and again. But you are literally describing, in the current infrastructure of society, the structures that are in place, becoming activated inside a new set of practices, a new set of connective possibilities where people can live into a new set of practices and values and be with each other in a whole new, different way.
Yeah, I think actually what I'm describing as the opposite of utopian. It's actually the most basic and boring and simple idea that's ever been thought of in human history. Since humans were humans for how many hundreds of thousands of years, we've been sitting around campfires, telling stories, singing songs, praying to something larger than ourselves, and celebrating the miracle of being alive. And that's all that I'm wanting, is to bring that essence, and that's that kind of it's not even indigenous, it's indigenous to human beings as a species, bringing that essence to communities in America that most of which feel very disconnected right now, most of which have loneliness and depression and isolation are on the rise, and COVID has only drastically exacerbated that. And there's an awakened awareness of the fact of that's happening. And I think there's a deep desire for bringing back those kind of timeless human qualities in a new container that is more inviting. So you don't just have to be Catholic, or you don't just have to be you don't just have to believe, you just have to be a human being, and you just have to be willing to be around other human beings. That's really the only credential that would be necessary for these places. And if we can create a world where diversity is not just about your race or your skin color or what you practice, but diversity is about just celebrating the fact that spirit or love is kind of showing up in everything at all times. To me, that's what's maybe a little bit utopian and a little bit radical, is creating centers that through the work of healing and transformation allow us to realize that the love that we're searching for is already here. And that's a process that's happened in my individual journey, and I want to do my best to try to bring that to others who are ready to walk that path as well.
In which a central element, as you're describing, is reclaiming our humanness, who we are as humans, because as you said, rightly so, it's new and radical, but it's also as old and as ancient as time, because it was with us as a thread from the beginning of time. People came together to make the next day better than the day before through their hopes and aspirations and the stories they told each other. So when you describe this vision and the beauty of listening to you describing that, it's the infrastructure for it is in place physically, but inside human beings. Do you have an intuition or a sense about the how of this, or the how is not yet like the how for you, and what might you want to do to try to begin it, or where would you start, or how will, because the thing about, as you know, some of the work I do is with large international companies, and I often work with a team, say 1 or 2 steps down in the organization, not just a CEO. I often work also with a more senior team, but when I work with a team in the organization, one of my core messages for them is, because they need to discover the feeling and the confidence that they can be empowered to change the organization. And the point I make to them is, often change doesn't actually begin at the top. You won't necessarily see the change in America starting in Washington, D.C., or in the White House or in the Congress. That's probably the last place it will show up. It will appear on the ground floor in many places all around. And then I describe that large change follows the anatomy of cloud formation. All you need is the right conditions in the atmosphere and a nucleus. And then you have a beginning of the cloud formation, and then that gathers around itself the momentum, and a larger cumulus cloud will form. So that is a poetic way of describing what Margaret Mead said, which was, never underestimate the power of a small group of people to change the course of history. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever caused that change. My addition is, when they began a conversation that was radical and genuine and passionate enough, and they stayed present in the conversation, that's when they are likely to catalyze change. So when you imagine, when you breathe into this vision, what else is showing up by way of intuition? How might this reveal itself to you? And although when I ask a question, partly the answer I'm getting back is, it's one of those things you'd put the foot forward, and then you'll discover, like Indiana Jones, that you're building the bridge under your foot as you walk. But still, I'd ask, what is the intuition that's showing up?
Well, that intuition guided me here to Pachamama, and this place is doing it. They've been doing it for 22 years. They've found some magical recipe. There's thousands of people that come here from all over the world, and I see every day people's lives entirely transforming. I see people literally calling their bosses in front of me and quitting their jobs and doing the things that I've done on my own journey. And it happens every single day, multiple times a day here. And so there's some magic here that I've come to study. And the thing is that people are flying to Peru, and they're flying to Bali, and they're flying to Costa Rica, and they're having these experiences, and then they go back to Winnipeg or to Buffalo or to Austin, Texas, and there's nothing there to catch them when they land. It's there's like a drainage of people that are kind of leaving and voyeuring out into this vast unknown sea, looking for these little portals. And so what I hope to do is to create, have landing pads for all these people that are coming back. And I think that right now there's like this hunger, there's this deep hunger, especially among young people that are in urban areas, to have places like these lighthouses, places like Pachamama, where they don't have to actually fly to Costa Rica, they go to them. And so I think that the need is there. And once like one seed is planted, it's just going to be this, I have total faith that it's all going to come together.
So the pathology or the problem you're describing that needs to be solved is people come and they have what you can describe as a peak experience, an expanded sense of awareness about life and the world and themselves, but then they come out of the experience and there is no vessel to or container to carry that experience into, so it dissipates as an unapproachable or unreachable peak experience. And it's a bit like going into expansion and contraction again. There is no new different platform that they actually land in. And so you're describing a circumstance that people could come back to and would be able to plug in and access some, even if not in quite the same way when they were away from their life. To stay in the experience you're in right now, to try to codify some of the operating system that makes it a success. So am I describing it right? There are three rings. There is the people that live full-time and are part of the existence of the ongoing endeavor. There are those that come to volunteer and spend, say, half a year or a year, but they're really plugging into the experience. And then there are guests that are there for a couple of weeks and so on. So you got right there an endeavor that creates an ecology that has its own purpose and its own nature, and built into it is the desire for it to serve an opportunity for others that come from outside of it. So right there is a metabolism of those that are coming and are bringing their influence and their struggle and their cravings, and there is a kind of a cross-fertilization, and the endeavor itself is not locked in its own history, because it needs to renew itself to meet the challenges and the opportunities that new people come in, the new people that are coming as guests bring to the table. And in that reciprocity, there is a cycle of renewal. You said one or two sentences before we started the recording, but that's what I interpreted from what you said.
Yes, that was very well articulated. Yeah. Yep.
Okay, because it's important to be forensic and diagnostic in what actually makes something work. Where are the pitfalls? What are the stumbling blocks and mistakes that the endeavor made earlier, so that you can be wiser and not repeat the same mistakes?
Yes, for sure. Yeah, as a template for a retreat center meets spiritual community, I would say Pachamama is quite brilliant in its integration of those two models. But I don't know if every town in America needs that model. I think what every town in America needs is what every town in America pretty much had for decades and centuries up until just recently, which is a church or a YMCA or a library or a coffee shop where not everyone is, on their headphones and on their devices. And there are these basic places where people can come and share ideas and have conversations like you and I are having, and places where there can be some sort of ceremony and some sort of celebration and some sort of gathering. And so I think it's much simpler. I was in a 12-step program for 2 years, and that is the most bare bones basic program in the world. It's free. There's these 12 steps and a few kind of guidelines, and somehow every time I went, I needed to hear exactly what I heard. It was like a miracle every single time. Every single time I went for 2 years, it was just perfect. They just found this very simple recipe. And so I think the solution that I feel is coming through me is actually radical in its simplicity. And of course, sometimes the simplest things can be the easiest to fuck up. So I recognize that, because a part of us wants to make it complex. We want to build it out. We want to create this meta model that has lots of different branches. And so what I'm trying to do is create maybe the most simplest thing, which is just a place where 10 people can come and meet and share ideas and have conversations. And then maybe they tell a few other people, and then it grows. And then somebody says, hey, I'm a meditation teacher. And then we start doing a weekly meditation meetup. And then somebody else comes and they do, they're musicians. And so they have kirtan sessions, or they sing Christian holiday songs, and whatever it is. And I think in each community, that kind of blueprint can adapt to meet the needs of the local people. And so this idea of becoming hyper local while having sort of a global awareness, that to me is very appealing. And I think people are going to be shocked by how radically simple it is when we go to these places. When I've experienced these different communities all over the world, it's what they're doing is so basic that it's genius. It really is. It's a paradox.
The discovery in what you're describing, the insight is the power of community. The how central to even this simple, you say radically simple application is that it occurs within a community. That is the insight, the operative insight that I hear in the vision you're describing. It is about people coming together away from their devices and screens. Although we can do this also on screens, but there is an emphasis and awareness about regrounding this in the local sense, in being in person, where there is something that occurs inside an ecology like this. Yeah.
And Aviv, I mean, it's happening. It's this recognition of how simple it is to bring together community is happening via Zoom during this pandemic, the past year and a half. I think everyone has recognized, wow, these conversations can be so rich when we bring together different people who share a common interest and we're able to dialogue on Zoom. But what does everybody say? It's like, wow, this is great, but I wish we could be together in person, And so let's do it. Let's find ways for people to be together in person, and of course, to still maintain this technological connection as well. And so it's really just about taking the next step forward that I think it's already going to happen. It already is happening. And I see what's alive in me is just being a small piece and that already unfolding destiny.
So by way of bringing this exploration today to landing, because in the Medium piece you wrote, there is the now a little wiser you talking to your younger you, and as the journey unfolds, now the younger you is rejoining with the you of this moment, and what are they saying to each other today, which is by way of what would you say to any parting words to anybody that stayed with us in this conversation through these 90 minutes, and in a way you'd, by way of invitation or encouragement or any other parting message, what would you wish to leave us with?
Yeah, I would say that I'm not any wiser than I was a couple of years ago. Who I was a couple of years ago was exactly as wise as I needed to be for that moment in time. I was at home at my dad's house recently for a couple of days, and I pulled out an old journal from, I guess, 2 or 3 years ago now, my first 10-day silent meditation retreat, and I read the entire journal, and I was just weeping tears because everything that I had longed for, everything that I was feeling into and wishing for in that journal has all come true. It's all manifested. It's all happened. And that wisdom that I had at that time was exactly what I needed to get me to where I am right now. And the wisdom that I have right now is exactly what I need to get me to where I'm going. And so the universe, my deep faith and my deep intuitive sense, and also through my contemplative study of many different traditions and lineages and belief systems, is that the universe gives us exactly what we need at exactly the right moment. And if we can trust that, if we can literally create that as a story that we see the world from, I promise the world will give us back exactly what we need. And that is beautiful, because it means that we can exhale and just be okay, and just be present, and just feel a little bit more free, and just feel a little bit more connected to something that's larger than ourselves. And just that little tiny bit is enough. And if it's not enough, then you'll feel it's not enough, and the universe will bring something else into your world that will give you just a little bit more. And it keeps going like this, on and on and on and on and on.
Tucker, thank you so much for this riveting, in the moment journey with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Aviv. It was a pleasure. It was fun.